All right, Chad, finally football season is here. It is game week for the Bearcats. What's the anticipation like just around this program right now? I know I see it that this could be one of their best seasons ever, and there's so many things that this team could accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, it's off the charts. It's easily the most anticipated season in UC football history. Even if you go back to 2009, that team was picked third in the Big East that year. Like, they lost a ton from 2008, the team that went to the Orange Bowl. They lost Connor Barwin and Mike Mickens and D'Angelo Smith. And, that was a team that was supposed to have a good offense, but there were a lot of questions still about just how good that team would be. It wasn't until, they beat the snot out of Rutgers to open the season that everybody kind of raised their eyebrows and went, wow, this UC team is pretty good. This team, huge target on their back from the minute that they take the field on Saturday. So it's fun. It's exciting. It's for a lot, I'm sure it's terrifying. There's been some talk on Bearcat Journal that, there's fans that aren't going to be able to enjoy 1 second of this season because there's so much pressure on it. But that's where you want to be, right? Like, you want to have that pressure, because if you don't have the pressure, your program isn't where you want it to be.
This is the first time, as you said, in a long time that the program has that kind of pressure, has that target on its back, and it's rightfully so with what they've done over the last few years. How can they manage that, though, and what does Luke Fickell have to do to be able to get those guys not buy into the headlines and keep their heads on and focused on what's coming up?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that they have going for them right now is they're a very old team, and 2 years ago, they were among the favorites in the league. They were the favorites, them and UCF in the division in 2019. They couldn't get over the hump against Memphis in those back-to-back games that they lost. And then last year, they had the target on their back from the start. They were the favorite. And so you hope that kind of helps you understand what the anticipation is, what the level that this team can accomplish plays out to be. I think especially with, you've got the leadership where you need it, right? You've got a great head coach, and you've got a quarterback that's won 31 games, which in college just doesn't happen very often. If he has a 10-win season, like Desmond Ridder, I don't think people realize this. Desmond Ridder could go down as a top 5 winningest quarterback in college football history. Not in UC. Like, he can go down as one of the top 5 winning quarterbacks in the history of the sport if they have a big season this year. So you've got the right leadership. You've got the right people in place where you need people in place, and you just got to manage the expectations and keep yourself grounded, because I don't think any of that stuff really matters until they get through week 5, right? Because if you don't beat Indiana and Notre Dame, it doesn't really matter anyway. If you beat Indiana and Notre Dame, and you're going into week 6 against Temple and then week 7 against Central Florida, both at Nippert Stadium, that's when the pressure really, really ratchets up.
I'm sure that's pressure that Luke Fickell would love to have, because at that point you're knocking on
right
with the college football playoff, a top 5 ranking and all that. With this team, we know the hype that's around it, and the guys they have coming back, and the defense being so talent laden and so deep at this point. The offense, what should we expect? This is a team that struggled sometimes to score points, move the ball a lot. What should we expect? Obviously, Desmond Ridder is the headliner on that side of it.
See, I think that's a myth a little bit. Like, yeah, they had a little bit of a slow start to last year, but that team last year was the number 2 scoring team in university history. They're right up at 40 points a game. They almost passed that 2009 team offensively. And what we saw at camp is we saw, one of the main things we talked about last year going into the season was the wide receiver room. Could the wide receiver room that was completely gutted and revamped, could they take this team to a different level? What we've seen in camp is that they're ready to do so. You've got Alec Pierce on one side. You've got 2 young guys in Jaden Thompson and Tyler Scott on the other side, outside. You've got Michael Young and Trey Tucker in the slot. You've got Josh Wiley and Lenny Taylor at tight end. Desmond Ridder has a wealth of options at his disposal. And as long as they hold up a tackle, right, that's the $1 million question. It's never fun when you got to replace your 2 starting all conference and one being an NFL draft pick tackles. If they can do that successfully, then they're in a really good spot.
Defensively, I mean, what more can you say? Are they going to live up to the hype that we have and all the what we assume is going to be high draft pick NFL talent?
Yes, I think what people still need to keep in mind is that you are breaking in a new coordinator, and there are going to be some things that are different from Marcus Freeman to Mike Tressel. And I think there is a possibility that takes a little bit of time to really click. So you hope it clicks by, week 3 at Indiana, but maybe they start out a little bit slower than people anticipate. Not in terms of like being bad or anything, but just not being maybe as completely suffocating right away as we've seen them in the past. But yeah, I mean, you've got everything you need. You've got pressure from the edges. You've got an NFL pass rusher. You've got a number 1 first round draft pick, legit lockdown corner. You've got a first team all conference corner opposite Ahmad Gardner and Kobe Bryant. You've got veteran linebackers. You've got veterans at safety. There's no weakness on paper for this defense. You've got a couple of 5th and 6th year guys at defensive tackle on the inside. You got a guy in Jawan Briggs, the transfer from Virginia, the Walnut Hills alum that's coming back home, and he looks like he's going to be a factor. There's just nowhere you look on this defense and say, well, they might not be where you want them to be. Everywhere you look and you go, that's as good as they've ever been here. And that's got to make Mike Tressel's job as he transitions a lot easier.
Who is the biggest challenge, do you think, in the AAC for UC this year?
2 teams, I think. Obviously, Central Florida is kind of who everybody is picking to be second in the league. And I think that's probably right. The only thing I really question with Central Florida is Gus Malzahn is a spread read option coach. Like, that's been his bread and butter. He's an offensive mind and he leans heavily on the read option. Dylan Gabriel's not a read option quarterback. He's not a guy that's going to get out in space and make you pay. He's a guy that can really push the ball down the field with accuracy. And what does that process look like, finding a middle ground between what Malzahn's comfortable running and the quarterback that he has? So I think that's really interesting with Central Florida. They get Boise early, and then, they don't have a whole lot. I think they play Louisville as well. The other one I think that can be really dangerous is SMU. I mean, they've got the weapons. The question is, they're working in a new quarterback. And defensively, what are they going to look like? Now, their defense has been a sieve, but they brought in a name that UC fans will be very familiar with to run their defense in Jim Leavitt. And while Jim Leavitt might not be everything you would want in a head coach, he is an outstanding defensive coordinator. So their defense is going to get better. If offensively they can work out their quarterback situation, I think SMU might be the number 2 threat in this league. Good news, Bearcat fans. You get UCF and SMU at home. Welcome to the NIP, boys.
The biggest question mark on this team is what?
Offensive line. And I think now that, they're getting healthy on the interior of that offensive line, which is, Jake Renfro, their starting center, missed a little bit of time in camp. He's now been back at practice and running with the first team. I think they're good. They're really good on the interior of that line. Like I said, you're working in 2 new tackles, and that is never easy, especially when they're protecting, the best player in the league and Desmond Ridder, at least the best offensive player in the league and Desmond Ridder. So tackle is a huge one. The other one, I don't even know. Do you see fans realize that James Smith isn't here anymore? Like, he was so steady for 4 years. You never had to think about punting. Like, James Smith was going to come in. He was going to pin the other team inside the 20, and the defense was going to come on the field. They've got a true freshman punter. He's the tallest punter in America at 6'7", 6'8" Mason Fletcher. He has gained some more weight since he got here. James Smith, famously on the Bearcat Journal podcast, nicknamed him the Rake because he looked like a rake. But punting, I think, is going to be another one because you just took it for granted how many times James Smith came out and flipped the field and put the defense in good position. And the other thing you never saw with James Smith, there was never a return because he had the hang time. He had the consistency. The return team was able to get down and make a play or force a fair catch. Can Mason Fletcher do that? How long does it take him to get to that point? I mean, I think that's the most telling part on special teams. So punter and the offensive tackles. Tackles, you got to be worried about. If your number 2 problem is punter, you got a pretty good team on paper.
Give me your season prediction. I won't ask you for a record, but unless you want to give one, but how do you think this all shakes out?
To get the record, you have to listen to this Thursday's BCJ podcast. That's our season preview. We do that every year. We make people wait all the way until then for our prediction on what the team is going to do this season. I think, looking at it, I think they're better, pretty considerably better than anybody else in the American. That's not to say that anything can't happen on any given day, but they get the best teams in the American at Nippert Stadium. UCF, SMU, and Tulsa all have to come to Nippert Stadium to play. So I think in that regard, like, this is a team that's built to win the American, and the rest of the season is going to depend on that 2-game Indiana road swing at Indiana, at Notre Dame, week 3, week 5. I think, and this is where my head is when going into Thursday's show. 0-2, 1-1, 2-0. The middle is probably the most likely, right? But do you go bold and say this is a team that's got a chance to crash the party? Do you back off and play it safe and say maybe not? So that's kind of where my head is at. Everything that they want is right there in front of them. So it's going to be very interesting to see where they are, October 3rd, when it comes down to laying it on the table and seeing where they are. Did they go 2-0 against Indiana and Notre Dame? And if they do, like I said, man, that narrative changes real fast.
He is the master of suspense and the master of everything UC Bearcats. Chad, appreciate you taking the time. And hey, football season is finally here, my friend.
Let's go.